Hi everyone, we're going to start working on activity number 18, and in this activity we are looking at radicals. So what are radicals? So these would be something like square roots, cube roots, so all sorts of roots. So what are these roots all about? So first of all, I'm going to explain how to do these without a calculator, and then we're going to switch and talk about how you would figure the same thing out with a calculator. So what is a square root? So let's start something with that you already know. Now, you know that 5 multiplied by itself will give you 25, right? 5 times 5 is 25. So because 5 squared is 25, so in other words, 5 times 5 is 25, we can write the same thing down as, instead we can say that square root of 25 equals 5. So when we want to know what is square root of some number, we're asking what number would get multiplied by itself and give us this number right here. So, for example, I'm trying to find square root of 64. So I'm asking what number squared is 64? So you might or might know, if you don't and you have your charts of squares, that that number is 8. So that's simple. So that's just going to be 8 right here. Now, over here for part B, we are asking, what is square root of negative 64? So imagine that you have some number, and we're just going to put a question mark on it, so that if you multiply it by itself, you get negative 64. So some number, imagine like question mark, and I'm multiplying by another question mark, and that gives me, can that give me negative number? So the answer is no, because when you multiply two numbers, if these two numbers are the same, I mean, there has to be exactly the same number, right? If they're both positive, so like 5 times 5 or 6 times 6 or 7 times 7, whatever, the answer will be positive, right? And imagine one of the numbers is negative, the other one is the same, so it's also negative. So for example, like negative 8 multiplied by negative 8, well, that's not going to give you negative 64, because negative and negative will cancel, so you actually would wind up with positive 64. So to make the long story short, that is just impossible. So you cannot have a number that you multiply by itself and you get negative 64. That's actually only true for real numbers, and there's some such thing that imaginary numbers, which we're not gonna even get to in this class. So for you guys, you're just gonna say no real answer, no real number can happen. So this is impossible. You cannot square a number and get a negative. So square root of a negative. So remember, the negative under the square root is undefined. You cannot have that. Now, for this guy, this is different. And so people think that it's the same thing. Oh, I can just take that negative that's here. Why don't I just pull it out of the root? That's not true. You cannot do that. So what is negative of square root of 64? So what that means is, first you find square root of 64, which is 8, as we already said. And then you apply that minus in the front. So that's just going to give you negative 8. Okay, so that's the difference. So if your negative is under the root, the answer is undefined. But if the negative is outside of the root, then the answer is just going to be negative number. So negative square root of 64 is just negative 8. Now, let me show you the same exact thing I can put on my calculator. So let's say I forgot, I'm on the test, I'm all nervous, I don't remember, I don't know what I can or cannot do, can't think, whatever you excuse you want to give yourself. But let's go ahead and see if we can dig it out of this calculator. So how do I find square root of 64? So what square root is this little thingy right here where this squared, but it's above that. So you have to press second. So let me clear that. So you press second first, and then you press the squared, and then you will see the root, and then you just type 64, whatever it is. Okay, now watch what would happen if they ask me, okay, find square root of negative 64. So I can do that. I mean, calculator is not gonna complain, right? I guess let's take a look at what the calculator will say. So negative, this little minus, and then 64, and oops, it does complain. It says, excuse me, that's impossible. So when you see that, you know that the answer is undefined. So that's not possible. Okay, now watch me put that minus outside. So I'm gonna insert. I'm gonna press second and delete to insert, and then I'm gonna put a little minus outside. So guess what that gives me? Just negative 8, just like I told you. That's what's gonna happen, and that is what happens. Okay, so with square roots, pretty easy. Just plug them in there. Now, what about cube roots? So cube roots, in some senses, are easier, because you can take a cube root of any number. It doesn't have to be positive. you can have a negative under the cube root. So on the square root, you cannot have negative numbers because it's impossible to multiply a number by itself and get a negative answer. But can you multiply 3 times a number by itself and then get a negative answer? The answer is sure. So negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4 is negative 4 cubed, and that is negative 64. So cube root of negative 64 is negative 4. So let's see if we can get some of these. Let's say we want to find something like that. Okay, so maybe you know that 4 multiplied by itself 3 times give you 64. But let's say you don't know that. Okay, let me show you on the calculator, because these cube things, you don't really need to do this in your head. Like, I mean, you can just plug them in. Okay, so let me show you how you would do that. So it's a little bit tricky, but once you figure it out, and please make sure that you know on your calculator how to do that for the test, because you don't want to sit there and try to punch the numbers and you don't know how to do it. Okay, so I want to find cube root of 64. So on this particular calculator, what I got to do first is press 3 first, then press the button that is right here. You see this button right here where it says X and then the root? Okay, so let me clear this. Okay, so let me press that button. So I press second, and then this little button right there, you see? And the moment I press it, the cube is what's called the index of the root. So now the index of the root is 3, and I can just type 64, press enter. Oh, it tells me 4. Okay, great. So now if I wanted to find cube root of negative 64, let me just grab this guy and copy that over here. And I just want to insert a negative and show you what happens. So I'm going to insert a little minus. It tells me that's negative 4. Okay, excellent. Now, if I want to put the minus in the front, so I put minus first, and then I put 3, and then the root, whatever that root is, there you go. And then I just put 64. And that should give me negative 4. So this is also negative 4. Yay. Okay, so that's how to do these roots that are just numbers. And in the next video, we're going to start talking about what happens when you have variables.